My own daughter watched me go under and never reached for the rope. As the cold water of Lake Cumberland swallowed me whole and my lungs began to scream, the last sound I heard before the darkness took me was not her voice calling for help. It was my wife, Donna, gasping a single sentence that rewired every circuit in my brain. "She's smiling, Hal. She's just standing there smiling. My name is Harold Mercer. Everyone calls me Hal. I am 64 years old, and until 3 days ago, I believed my daughter was the best thing I ever built. I spent 31 years as a marine salvage engineer, pulling wrecked ships off the ocean floor, reinforcing underwater foundations, solving problems that most people couldn't even see. I thought I understood pressure. I thought I understood what it meant when a structure fails. But I had never once turned that professional eye toward my own family and asked the question that now keeps me awake at night. Where are the cracks? If you have ever poured everything you had into a child, every dollar, every sleepless night, every sacrifice you never even named out loud, and then watched that child look right through you like you were furniture, hit that like button right now. I need to know I am not alone in this. Before I tell you how I survived a rigged kayak accident on a Tennessee lake and clawed my way back from the bottom of a betrayal I never saw coming, drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from. Your presence here is the only thing keeping my hands steady enough to type this. It happened on a Saturday morning in October, the kind of morning that makes you believe everything is fine. The water was glass smooth. The maples along the shoreline were burning red and gold. Donna and I had spent the previous evening on the back deck of our lake house, the one I built with my own hands over 3 summers in the early 90s, grilling steaks and listening to my daughter Cassie laugh at something her fiancé Brandon had said. Brandon Rowe. I want you to remember that name. Cassie had brought him into our lives 14 months earlier. Tall, easy smile, the kind of man who always seemed to be performing for an invisible audience. I had reservations. I kept them to myself because my daughter was 37 years old and I had spent too many years keeping my mouth shut when I should have spoken and speaking when I should have listened. I was trying to do better. I was trying to simply be present and trust her judgment. That trust cost me everything. The kayak trip was Brandon's idea. He had been pushing for it all weekend, said the fall colors were too beautiful to waste sitting on the deck. He had rented 4 kayaks from the marina Thursday afternoon. He knew the layout of the coves, knew which channels ran deep, knew where the current came in cold from the north tributary. He had done his research. I know that now. I didn't know it then. We paddled out in pairs. Cassie and Brandon ahead, Donna and I behind. The water was perfect. I remember thinking that this was one of those rare mornings you should hold on to. Tuck it somewhere safe so you can find it later when the world goes gray. We were about 400 yards from shore when Brandon suggested we paddle into the narrow channel between the 2 limestone shelves. He said the rock formations were stunning from inside. Cassie agreed immediately. She didn't look at us when she agreed. She just turned her kayak and followed him in. The channel was shadowed and cold. The limestone walls rose on either side, maybe 12 feet high, close enough that you could touch both with your arms extended. Beautiful, yes, but also completely isolated from anyone on the open water. I don't remember the exact moment it happened. I remember hearing a sound like a zipper, fast and sharp, and then my kayak simply folded. The hull had been scored almost all the way through, something sharp drawn along the underside in 3 parallel cuts, deep enough that the pressure of the water was always going to split it the moment it flexed over a wake. My kayak didn't capsize. It came apart. The water hit me like a wall. 61-degree lake water in October has a way of announcing itself. Every muscle in my chest locked. I couldn't breathe in. I couldn't breathe out. I went straight down because my waders were pulling me. Waders I had put on that morning because Donna had complained about the cold and I had wanted to be prepared. The same waders that Brandon had encouraged me to wear at breakfast. Said the seat of the kayak runs cold this time of year. I fought my way to the surface. It took everything I had. My hands were already clumsy from the cold. I broke the surface and grabbed at the shattered hull of my kayak, but there was nothing left to grab, just floating chunks of composite material. I looked toward the banks. I looked toward Cassie. She was maybe 20 feet away. She was sitting perfectly still in her kayak, both hands resting on her paddle, watching me, not calling for help, not paddling toward me, watching. The expression on her face was the one that broke me. It was not panic. It was not grief. It was the held breath stillness of someone watching to see if the thing they hoped would happen is actually going to happen. Then Donna screamed from behind me. "Not my name." She screamed 4 words. "She's not moving, Hal." Her voice cracked the stone walls of that channel like a hammer. "She's not moving at all." I went under again. The waders had water in them now, a dead weight dragging me toward the bottom. I fought. I am 64 years old with a bad shoulder from a cable accident in '98, but I am also a man who spent his career underwater, and the one thing that 30 years of working in cold, dark, disorienting water will give you is the absolute refusal to panic. I unclipped the wader straps. I shed them. I burned through the last of my oxygen, kicking back up. I came up gasping, lungs on fire, hands barely working. I grabbed a piece of my shattered hull. It wasn't enough to hold me up, but it was enough to slow the sinking. That was when Donna reached me. She had paddled hard from behind, screaming the entire way. She pulled her kayak alongside and shoved the bow toward me. I grabbed it. I hung there, panting, my face half in the water, staring at the limestone wall and listening to the sound of my own body trying to survive. I heard Brandon's voice from somewhere behind Cassie. "We have to get to shore. He might be hurt. We need to call someone." His voice was very controlled. It was the voice of a man running a script, not the voice of a man who just watched his future father-in-law nearly drown. "Don't call out," Donna said in my ear. She was pressed close to me over the side of her kayak, one arm locked around my wrist. She was shaking with cold and with something else. "Hal," she whispered, "I saw him check your kayak at the launch. I didn't think anything of it. He said he was just adjusting the foot pegs. But I saw him crouching under the hull, and I didn't say anything because I thought I was being paranoid, and I am so sorry. I am so sorry." I looked past her shoulder at Cassie, who had still not moved. At Brandon, who was already paddling calmly toward the channel exit, as if the emergency had resolved itself, as if the body had already settled. Something cold moved through me that had nothing to do with the water. I let Donna pull me against the limestone wall, into the shadow, out of their sight line. I put my finger against my lips. She stared at me with terrified eyes and nodded once. We heard Brandon calling across the water. His voice carried in the channel, amplified by the stone. "Cassie," he said, "we wait 20 minutes. Then we call it in. Say he went under in the current and we couldn't get to him in time. The water temperature will take care of the rest. They'll find him on Thursday, maybe Friday. By then the cold will have done the work." I heard Cassie say something I could not make out. Then Brandon again, shorter this time. His voice had lost the performance in it. It was flat, businesslike. "The insurance pays out faster with a body," he said. "You know the timeline we're working with. We discussed this." I held onto that limestone wall for 30 seconds, breathing through my nose, and I made a list in my head. The way engineers make lists. Calm, ordered, without sentiment. My daughter knew what was going to happen to me this morning. My daughter's fiancé cut my kayak the night before or early this morning. They are waiting for me to die. There is a timeline. There is an insurance policy involved. This was not an accident, and it was not a moment of desperate stupidity. This was planned. I squeezed Donna's hand. I mouthed 2 words. "Play along." We came out of the channel. I let Donna support me. I let myself look worse than I was. Brandon was remarkably good at performing distress. He got on his phone immediately. He held Cassie while she made sounds that might have been crying. He told the marina operator that there had been a kayak failure and an older man had nearly drowned and they needed medical attention at slip 14 right away. He never asked if I was okay. The paramedics took us to the county hospital. I sat in the back of that ambulance with a thermal blanket around my shoulders and Donna's hand in mine, and I said nothing. I answered the paramedics' questions in short sentences. I let them check my vitals and shine lights in my eyes and tell me I was lucky. When Cassie came into the exam bay and put her hand on my arm and said, "Oh, Dad," I was so scared. I looked at her face and looked for the girl I had raised and could not find her anywhere behind those eyes. I squeezed her hand and said, "I know. Sweetheart, I know. She believed me. That was the first mistake she made. The hospital released me 4 hours later with instructions to rest and monitor for signs of hypothermia. Brandon drove us back to the lake house. He was warm and attentive the entire drive. He carried my bag inside. He offered to make dinner. I watched him move through my kitchen, my house, my life, and I cataloged every movement, every micro-expression, every moment where his eyes went somewhere else and came back flat. He was already somewhere else in his head. He was already spending money. I told Donna I needed to rest. I asked Cassie and Brandon to stay for dinner because I didn't want to be alone. They agreed too easily. I went upstairs, waited 15 minutes, then came back down the back staircase that lets out behind the utility room where the home network server lives. I had built this house. I knew every corner of it. I had wired it myself 12 years ago and upgraded the system 8 years ago when Donna got nervous about being out here alone when I was working offshore. There were 9 cameras total, 6 inside, 3 outside. The footage ran on a closed loop to a local server in the utility room. Not to the cloud, not to any phone Brandon could access or monitor. Old school hardwired system. The kind of thing a man who spent his career trusting physical cable over wireless signal installs when it's his family's safety on the line. Brandon didn't know it existed. I had never mentioned it. It was just part of the house to me, like the water softener or the circuit panel, invisible infrastructure. I sat down in front of the server terminal, pulled up the footage from the previous night, and scrolled backward from midnight. At 2:17 in the morning, Brandon walked out of the guest room in dark clothes and went to the storage shed where I kept the kayaks. He was inside for 11 minutes. He came back to the house carrying nothing. He had put whatever tool he used back where he found it, or brought it himself and taken it with him. Either way, the footage showed exactly what I needed it to show. Premeditation. 11 minutes in the dark with my kayak. I sat there in the blue light of that monitor for a long time. The house was quiet above me. I could hear muffled conversation, Cassie's laugh, the sound of Brandon opening the refrigerator, living in my house, eating my food, waiting for the grief to become manageable so they could access the accounts. I went back to the footage from that afternoon, from before the trip, and I found something I was not expecting. Brandon had made 2 phone calls from the driveway. He had stepped outside at 11 in the morning while Cassie was helping Donna prep lunch. He had his back to the house. The outdoor camera had no audio, but I could see him clearly. His posture was different from how he presented himself inside. His shoulders were up. His free hand was moving. He was not relaxed. He was reporting to someone. I sat with that image for a while. Then I went to the filing cabinet next to the server, where I keep hard copies of everything related to my business. I found the folder for Mercer Marine Salvage, the company I had owned for 27 years. The company I had sold 60% of 3 years ago to a development firm called Coastline Acquisitions. The managing partner of Coastline Acquisitions was a man named Dennis Holt, who had been trying to buy the remaining 40%, including the patent portfolio for deep water anchor systems I had developed over 20 years. Ever since the original sale, I had refused every offer. The patents alone were worth more than the cash he was dangling. I went back to the driveway footage. I looked at the timestamp, then I looked at my phone records from the same hour. At 11:04 that morning, I had received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I had let it go to voicemail. I had not listened to the message. I listened to it now. It was Dennis Holt's voice, not his assistant, him. And what he said was not a business offer. It was a reminder. He said, "Brandon tells me the timeline is this weekend. I want confirmation by Monday morning that we are on track to execute the transfer documents. Don't make me come down there, Cassie. The deal we made benefits everyone, but only if it happens on schedule." I had to read that sentence 3 more times before it resolved into something I could hold. My daughter had not fallen in love with Brandon Rowe. She had made a business arrangement with Dennis Holt. Brandon was the instrument. The kayak was the mechanism. My patents, my company, my life insurance, all of it was the payment. And my daughter was the architect. She wasn't the grieving child being manipulated by a dangerous man. She was the one who had placed the call. I sat in that utility room for a long time. I thought about the Christmas she was 9 years old, and I had driven 45 minutes in a snowstorm to find the one specific doll she wanted because every other store was sold out. I thought about sitting in hospital waiting rooms when she was 17 and had her appendix out, and I had held her hand and told her I would not let anything happen to her. I thought about the check I had written 4 years ago to pay off her condo because she was underwater on the mortgage and too proud to ask twice. I did not cry. I had already cried. I had cried at the bottom of that lake when my lungs were burning, and I still thought this was an accident. Whatever grief I owed that memory of my daughter, I had already paid it in cold water at the bottom of that channel. What I felt now was something else. Cleaner. Harder. The feeling I used to get when I was working a recovery operation, and I had assessed the damage and calculated the approach, and there was nothing left to do but the work. I went back upstairs. I walked into the living room. Brandon handed me a glass of water and asked how I was feeling. I told him I was tired but grateful to be alive. I looked at my daughter and smiled at her and said there was nowhere in the world I would rather be than here with my family, and I watched the relief move across her face and hated myself a little for how well I could perform when I needed to. After they went to bed, I called Ray Kowalski. Ray had been my dive partner for 11 years before he retired and opened a private security firm outside of Nashville. He was the kind of man who had spent his career in water and in conflict and had come out the other side with a very simple philosophy about complicated situations. He believed in preparation, he believed in patience, and he believed that the only response to someone trying to take everything from you was to make absolutely certain they had nothing left when it was over. He answered on the second ring. It was close to midnight. He sounded fully awake. I told him everything. The kayak, the footage, the voicemail, Dennis Holt, the patents, my daughter. I spoke in a flat, even voice because that was the only way I could get through it without stopping. Ray was silent for most of it. When I finished, he said one thing. "Where are you right now?" I told him I was at the lake house. He said, "Don't move anything. Don't change your behavior. Act like everything is normal. I will be there tomorrow morning looking like your insurance adjuster." I said, "Ray, I need this done legally. I need them to sign something. I need them standing in a room thinking they have already won when it falls apart." He said, "Hal, in 30 years I have never once let the wrong person walk away from a job. You just tell me where to stand." I slept 3 hours. Donna slept against my shoulder, and I listened to her breathe, and I thought about all the ways I had tried to protect her from things that were never going to hurt her, and had completely missed the thing sitting at our dinner table calling, "Me dad." Ray arrived at 10 the following morning in a gray sedan and a suit that cost more than my first car. He introduced himself to Brandon as a representative from the underwriter, handling my life insurance policy, said that the incident on the lake had triggered a standard accident review required for policies above a certain value. He was calm, professional, carrying a briefcase, wearing reading glasses he didn't need. He was utterly convincing in the way that only men who have spent their lives working in the dark can be convincing in the light. Brandon's face when he heard the words insurance review was a thing I will remember until I die. He smiled and extended his hand and said, "Of course, anything to help." And the smile didn't reach his eyes by about 6 inches. Over the next hour, Ray laid out the situation with the precision of a man diffusing something delicate. He told Brandon that the policy payout would be expedited, given the corroborating witness testimony and the medical documentation. He told him that there was one remaining step, a formal affidavit signing in the presence of the estate attorney and a notary, required for any claim above $2 million. He scheduled it for the following morning at 9. Brandon excused himself to make a call. He went to the driveway. I watched from the upstairs window, and I saw the same posture I had seen in the camera footage. Shoulders up, hand moving. He was calling Dennis Holt. I knew it without hearing a word. That evening, Cassie made dinner. She set the table the way she used to when she was a teenager, trying to show she was sorry for something. She asked about my shoulder. She asked if I needed anything. I sat across from her, and I answered her questions. And I thought about a little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during road trips, and I let myself feel the full weight of that grief for exactly 5 minutes. Then I put it away. After she went to bed, I retrieved the server backup drive from the utility room, the voicemail recording I had saved to my own phone, and a statement I had written and printed in the utility room that afternoon, detailing everything from the kayak preparation the night before to the phone call from Dennis Holt. I put all of it in the inside pocket of my jacket, and I sat in the dark kitchen and waited for morning. The estate attorney, a man named Phil Garrett who had handled my affairs for 18 years, and who I had called personally the afternoon before to explain in plain terms what was happening, arrived at 8:55. He sat up at the dining room table with the documents Ray had prepared. Ray stood near the window. I sat in the corner. Donna sat beside me and held my hand under the table hard enough that I could feel her pulse. Brandon and Cassie came downstairs together. Brandon was dressed carefully. He sat down at the table and accepted coffee from Phil with a steady hand and a practiced expression of sober grief. Cassie sat beside him and folded her hands in her lap and looked at the documents the way a person looks at something they have been waiting for a long time. Phil began to read the terms: the estate, the life insurance payout, the patent portfolio transfer, the lake house. I watched Brandon's face while Phil read, and I saw the subtle, involuntary softening that comes over a person when they hear numbers that mean they will never have to be afraid again. He thought the hard part was behind him. Phil reached the end of the document. He turned the folder to face Brandon and said, "Sign on the line indicated," and Brandon reached for the pen. "Wait." The word came out of Ray's mouth like a door closing. Brandon looked up, his hand still on the pen. Ray was looking not at Brandon but at me. He said, "Hal, I believe you wanted to say something before we proceed." I stood up. My shoulder hurt. My chest still ached from the water. I was wearing the same flannel shirt I had been wearing when I nearly drowned because I wanted them to see it. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, and I put the backup drive on the table. Then I put my phone down beside it, already open to the voicemail, already queued. I pressed play. Dennis Holt's voice filled the dining room. "Brandon tells me the timeline is this weekend. I want confirmation by Monday morning. The deal we made benefits everyone, but only if it happens on schedule." When the voicemail ended, the silence in that room was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the phone on the table. Her face had gone the color of old paper. She had not moved since the recording began. Brandon's hand was still on the pen. He hadn't moved either. He looked like a man who had just watched the floor open up under his feet and had not yet fallen. I said, quietly, "I need you to know that I watched you walk to that shed at 2 a.m. I have 11 minutes of footage. I have Dennis Holt on a recording he cannot explain. And Phil has already filed a report with the county sheriff's office and the state attorney general's office detailing a conspiracy to commit first-degree murder for financial gain." Phil opened a second folder and slid it across the table. It was not an insurance waiver. It was a criminal complaint, already signed, already filed. The copy in front of them was informational. Brandon stood up. He did not say anything. He looked at the folder, then at Ray, and something in his face simply closed. Whatever performance he had been running since he walked into our lives went dark all at once like a screen switching off. He was just a man in an expensive shirt, standing in a kitchen that didn't belong to him. Cassie said, "Dad." She said it the way a child says it. She said it the way my daughter used to say it when she needed something from me that she knew she didn't deserve. And even then, even in that room with everything I knew and everything I had heard, the word did something to my chest that I don't have adequate language for. I looked at her for a long moment. I looked for the 9-year-old in the car. I looked for the 17-year-old in the hospital bed. I found them, briefly, and then I looked at what had grown over them, the way rust grows over steel that has been neglected too long, and I understood that no amount of my wanting could undo what she had chosen to become. I said, "You were my daughter, and you arranged to have me killed for a patent portfolio and a lake house." She opened her mouth. Brandon put his hand on her arm, not gently, a reflexive movement, the gesture of a man whose real relationship to her was now visible. She pulled away from him. That small movement told me everything about how much the two of them were about to start blaming each other. The sheriff arrived 6 minutes later. Ray had sent him the backup drive the previous afternoon. There was nothing to explain. There was nothing to argue. The footage ran 11 minutes and showed a man crouching under a kayak hull in the dark. The voicemail had Dennis Holt's name and phone number on it. Phil had the statements, notarized and dated. I watched them put the handcuffs on Brandon from the dining room window. He did not resist. He looked at the driveway the way a man looks at something he built that has just fallen down. Cassie was walked out behind him. She looked back at the house once. I don't know what she was looking for. I hope she found it. I did not wave. Dennis Holt was arrested at his office in Nashville at approximately the same hour, courtesy of a federal contact Ray had called the previous morning. A man who had been looking for a solid financial crimes angle on Holt's acquisitions firm for the better part of 2 years. The patent transfer documents and the voicemail were what he needed. Sometimes the longest investigations close fast when the right door opens. 3 days later, I sat at the dining room table with Phil and Ray and a cup of coffee that tasted like something real for the first time in a week. I restructured the estate. The patents stay with Mercer Marine in perpetuity, held in a trust. The lake house stays. The life insurance policy names Donna as the sole beneficiary, and I had the premiums reviewed because I needed to know whether the policy itself had ever been tampered with at the application stage, whether Brandon had influenced any of the original terms. It hadn't. Some mercies are small. I also did something that surprised even Donna. I set up an education trust for my granddaughter, Cassie's daughter from her previous marriage, a 7-year-old named Grace who had spent the weekend of the accident at her paternal grandmother's house 2 counties away, oblivious to everything. Grace, who had drawn me a picture of a boat last Christmas and taped it to the refrigerator. Grace, who had nothing to do with any of this, and who was going to need someone to be in her corner when she was old enough to understand what her mother had done. I put Ray in charge of the trust's administration. He grumbled about paperwork. He said I was replacing one problem with another. I told him that doing right by a child who had been failed by her parents was not a problem. It was a responsibility, and that a man who had spent 30 years recovering things from the bottom of the ocean ought to understand the value of salvaging what could still be saved. That quieted him down. The lake is still out there. Some mornings I walk to the end of the dock and stand with my coffee and look at the channel between the limestone shelves where I nearly became a cold case in the county records. The maples are bare now. The water is dark gray and still. I do not feel afraid of it. I have worked underwater in conditions that would stop most people's hearts, and I have come to understand that the water itself is neither hostile nor forgiving. It is simply honest. It does exactly what physics requires it to do. The danger was never the lake. The danger was the man who researched its depth and temperature and current patterns and decided it was a useful tool. The danger was a version of my daughter I never successfully reached. I burned the letters. She has sent 4 since the arraignment. I do not read them because I have already heard everything she would say, in a voice I know better than my own, and there is nothing left in those words that serves either one of us. The court process will do what the court process does. I will not stand in the way of it, and I will not hurry it along. I simply will not be defined by it. What I will tell you, if you are a parent watching this, if you have ever felt the particular loneliness of giving your whole life to someone and then standing in a room while they look past you, is this: you cannot engineer loyalty in a person who has decided against it. You can build the strongest structure in the world, and it will still fail if the foundation chooses to crack. That is not your fault. That is not a reflection of your love or the quality of what you gave. Some things fail from the inside, and no amount of reinforcement from the outside changes that. What you can do is survive it. You can choose the people who choose you back. You can protect the innocent ones who are downstream of someone else's failure. You can walk out to the end of your dock in the morning and drink your coffee and let the cold air remind you that you are still standing on something solid. I am still standing on something solid. My name is Hal Mercer. I am 64 years old. I went underwater and I came back up, and I intend to keep doing that until I no longer can. Blood will bring people to your table. Character is what keeps them there. Do not mistake one for the other. That is the hardest lesson I have ever learned, and I am still learning the full weight of it every single morning. If this story found you at a moment when you needed it, leave a comment below. Tell me what city you're watching from, and tell me what you've had to let go of to protect your own peace. I read every word. Until next time, watch your foundation and trust your gut. They almost always know before you do.